I see some responses coming in. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so as you all respond. All right, about 10 more seconds. Get those responses in. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and I'll share the results. So it's wonderful to see so many different perspectives represented today. It looks like we have a good mix of home visitors, supervisors, some program directors and administrators, and a few other roles like researchers or consultants. And many of you are knowledgeable about strategies, and many are looking for practical ideas. And if that's the case, you are in the right place because we're going to share those with you today. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Marielle.
Thanks so much, Colleen, and thanks everybody for participating in the poll and joining us this afternoon or this morning, whatever time it is for you. Really excited to have this conversation with everybody today and present some work at JBA related to home visiting workforce research. Before we talk about the framework itself, which is really the focus of this webinar, I want to take just a quick moment to share how we approach our work, specifically our work related to supporting the home visiting workforce through research and evaluation. In our approach to this work, we really very carefully design our research and evaluation efforts to produce information that can be used in real time to inform practices on the ground. So, everything we hope to share with you all today is really designed to help a home visitor, supervisor, program director, or state administrator, which sounds like that's who we have on the call today, advocate for strong workforce support strategies for themselves or to make decisions for supporting the workforce moving forward. You can see on this slide, there's four principles that really guide our work with this aim in mind. The first of which is that the work is practical. We design workforce research for use, not just for publication. So instead of a deliverable being a final report, we really want it to be a conversation surrounding changes that can be made, whether those changes are small or large, to better support the home visiting workforce moving forward. We also focus on research and evaluation that is actionable. So, findings that translate to real tools, strategies, and decisions. We strive to point to something that can actually be strengthened or done differently as a function of findings, not just to report findings. The third is that they're field informed. This is something we feel really strongly about and is really central to all the other principles you see listed here. We know that the home visiting field is full of expertise, and that expertise lives with home visitors, supervisors, and program leaders. So our research is shaped by current needs and by lived experience, not just by our own research agendas. And finally, we approach our work in an iterative way. We refine through ongoing engagement and feedback. We test our own assumptions and update our resources as new priorities and needs emerge from the field. So, just want to set that out that that's the lens with how we approach our work and the way we approach the work that we'll share with you today, which really represents almost over a decade of work in the home visiting space. Many of the projects focused specifically on supporting the home visiting workforce. So this is a lens how we approach our work and also in partnership with the field. So I'm going to pass it back to Colleen, who's going to provide a little bit of background on the rationale for developing the framework that we'll walk through together today.
Thanks, Mary L. So I'm going to begin by providing a little bit of background on the home visiting workforce. According to the National Home Visiting Resource Center's 2025 yearbook, in 2024, more than 17,000 home visitors delivered evidence based home visiting to nearly 300,000 families. By supporting adults and children simultaneously, the home visiting workforce drives critical outcomes, including healthy pregnancies, healthy babies, and nurturing parent child relationships. But the impact of home visiting depends on the well being of our workforce. The truth is simple: when home visitors thrive, families thrive. We cannot adequately support families if we do not first support the workforce. But across the country, states and local programs are grappling with persistent challenges, including high turnover, workforce shortages, and home visitors who are deeply committed but stretched thin. Research demonstrates that 20 to 29% of home visiting staff turn over annually. Turnover is challenging in any industry, but especially one built on long-term relationships. Workforce turnover contributes to increased program cost, decreased program quality and family engagement, and decreased impact on child and family outcomes. As home visiting expands to serve more communities, systems that support the workforce need to be strengthened. If we want to scale our impact, we have to scale our support. And now I'll pass it back to Marielle, who will introduce our framework.
Thank you. So that in short, at a very high level, is the landscape for the home visiting workforce. We know that the workforce is essential, that the workforce is under strain, and that the systems that support the home visiting workforce could use some strengthening. But the question we kept coming back to is how do we organize what we already know, what we know is already working in a way that is really digestible for the field and that the field can easily sort of access and use. So that's what we want to walk through next. We call it the promotive factors framework. Go to the next slide. Thank you. Just to start, we want to talk about a little bit about when we sit down with programs and state leaders to talk about the workforce, the conversation almost always starts in one place, and that's focusing on the problems. And there are real problems, some of which Colleen just highlighted. We certainly don't want to minimize that. But if we talk only about challenges and barriers, we can get stuck there. So we're trying to introduce this conversation through around three lenses. First is the problems, the challenges and barriers that the workforce faces on a daily basis. These are real and they need to be acknowledged and named, but also the possibilities, what is already working, the research that points to solutions, the state and local innovations that are quietly making a difference across the nation. And there is actually quite a bit more of this than people may realize. And then the promotive factors, which is just a common framework that gives us a shared language to organize all of that possibility. So the promotive factors do not replace the problem conversation, but they do give us somewhere to go with that conversation. Instead of only asking what is wrong, we can ask what would it look like if this were working, and what does the evidence say it would take to get there? Go to the next slide, Colleen. So, talking a little bit first about how we identified the promotive factors, let's start with talking about how we define the term. A promotive factor is a factor with evidence to promote outcomes that matter for the home visiting workforce. So, just take a moment to notice what's built into that definition. It's not just any good idea. It has to have evidence behind it, and it has to move outcomes that the workforce itself cares about. So we started with the outcomes, and the ones that come up over and over again in the literature and in our conversations with the field include those you see listed on the slide today. So job satisfaction, well-being, retention, and job performance. And on the other side of that, burnout, which is what we want to prevent. These are the outcomes that determine whether a workforce stays, grows, and serves families well. Then we filtered everything through these two lenses, and we want to be able to emphasize both. First is the research evidence. Over the course of our bodies of work and multiple projects in the home visiting space, we've completed extensive reviews of literature in home visiting, related helping professions, as well as in the broader field of organizational psychology. Because home visitors are not the only workforce that has wrestled with burnout and turnover, there is a lot to learn from adjacent fields. Second, and just as important, is field engagement. We've talked with home visitors, supervisors, and program administrators. And so this framework is not just what the literature alone has said, it is what has emerged when we put the literature in conversation with the people actually doing the work on a daily basis. And what came out of this process is the framework we're about to talk about today, the 8 promotive factors that, taken together, describe what a thriving workforce needs. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So here it is, the 8 promotive factors that together form the foundation for a thriving home visiting workforce. The promotive factors include accessible pathways into the workforce, adequate and fair compensation, resources and support, opportunities for career advancement, flexibility and autonomy, relationships and connections, workforce voice, validation, and recognition. We chose this visual image of a tree on purpose because these factors are not meant to be a checklist. Rather, they're a living system. They interact with one another, they grow together, and when one is weak, the others have to carry more weight. So, a home visitor who has strong relationships with their supervisor but feels invisible to the broader system is still at risk. A program that pays well but offers no career advancement opportunities will still lose staff. So the factors hold each other up. In the time we have together today, we're going to focus and go a little bit deeper on 4 of these promotive factors, not all 8. And these are the 4 that come up more consistently in our field engagement as places where programs feel like they could really move the needle. But the full framework with all 8 factors is in the resource that we'll put in the chat now and that we'll also share with everyone after today's webinar. So the 2 resources that are going to go in the chat that everybody should be able to access now is a short brief that has an overview of the promotive factors framework, as well as a link to a compendium of strategies. So existing strategies to support the home visiting workforce organized within these 8 promotive factors. So encourage everybody to take a look at that because we won't have time to dive deep into all the promotive factors today. Next slide, please, Colleen. So we'll start with resources and supports because this is often where home visitors may feel a gap in a more concrete way. I think based on the poll that we took at the top of this webinar, most of you recognize that home visitors are highly trained professionals that do complex, individualized work with families. They draw on multidisciplinary training to navigate situations that would quite honestly challenge most professionals, and they need tools to do that well. So resources and supports includes 3 components. It includes human supports in the form of professional development, supervision, coaching, and mentoring. It also includes practical supports in the form of tools and materials, and structural supports in clear policies and procedures. When these supports are all in place, they reduce stress and burnout, they build confidence and capability. When they're missing, home visitors are still expected to perform and do their job well, but they have to absorb that gap themselves, which is when the risk of burnout increases. So, what does this look like in practice? In practice, this might look like reliable technology and transportation, such as access to technology that can reduce administrative burden and help home visitors focus on families, reliable and fast internet connections. It can also include responsive curricula and materials that includes content that really fit the needs of the families being served and reflect current and emerging priorities of families so they're updated on a regular basis and are easy for home visitors to access and navigate. It can also include practices and policies that create realistic time for travel and reporting and protect the parts of the job that we know happen between home visits. So, if a home visitor cannot do their best work because they don't have the necessary tools and resources, that's not a workforce problem, but it's a systems problem, and systems can be improved. We go to the next slide, Colleen, and we'll talk a little bit about the next promotive factor, which is relationships and connections, which this one is very special because home visiting is a relational profession at its core. The work happens through relationships, and the workforce is sustained by relationships too. Relationships and connections has two layers. The relationships home visitors build with families and communities, that's the work itself, and the connections home visitors have with peers and supervisors. And that is what sustains them in doing the work that they do. When we ask home visitors why they stay in this field, the answer is almost always the same. It's the families and it's the relationships. So, relationships with families are the primary source of meaning and motivation. They are a key driver of satisfaction and retention, and people stay in the field because of who they get to walk alongside in this critical parenting journey. In practice, this looks like protected time for relational work, so caseloads and schedules that let a visit truly be a visit, not a checkbox. Peer learning communities, spaces where home visitors can learn from each other, debrief together, and feel less alone, as well as strong supervisor staff relationships. So, reflective supervision that goes beyond administrative check ins and creates real space and time to help home visitors navigate the emotional weight of the work that they do. Programs that invest here have home visitors who feel connected to families, to each other, and to their supervisor. And that can carry a lot. When that connection starts to thin or is strained, even small stressors can feel difficult to overcome and manage. Go to the next slide. The next promotive factor we'll talk about today is workforce voice, which in some ways is one of the simplest factors, but also one that is kind of hard to do well. The principle itself is straightforward. Home visitors should have a voice in the decisions that shape their work. Workforce voice includes two pieces. First, it includes workforce input on needs and solutions, asking home visitors what they actually need and asking them what they think would work. Second, it includes an inclusion in program decisions, bringing the workforce into the room where decisions are made. And the evidence behind this promotive factor is actually very clear. Having a voice in program decision making is linked to higher retention. And beyond retention, it makes the supports we design more relevant and more responsive because they're built with the workforce, not just for them. So, what would this look like in practice? Concretely, it could look like home visitors being on planning groups, not just as observers, but as decision makers, co designing workforce strategies, having the workforce help shape the supports that they will actually use, as well as regular structured input opportunities through surveys, focus groups, feedback loops that actually feed back into action. So, while this promotive factor is straightforward in principle, it takes a lot of intention to do it well. It's fairly easy to think about an annual workforce survey as voice, but real workforce voice means building the structures and the trust so that the workforce's input is given freely and visibly acted on. Next slide, Colleen. Thanks. So, the last promotive factor we'll feature today is validation and recognition. And of all the factors, this is often the one that home visitors talk about with the most feeling. Home visiting is often misunderstood and undervalued. People outside the field do not always know what home visitors do, how skilled the work is, or how much it matters to children and families. That gap between the value of the work, how challenging the work it is, and the recognition of it can wear on people over time. So, validation and recognition has two layers: public acknowledgement, which includes the field being seen and valued by communities, policymakers, and funders, as well as program level acknowledgement, the day to day recognition of home visitors' expertise and the daily work that happens inside an agency. When recognition is in place, it increases the visibility of the field, it supports job satisfaction and retention. And when it is absent, even the best resources or the best supervision cannot fully compensate. People simply need to feel seen. So, in practice, this might look like visitors telling their own stories in policy spaces, in research, and in advocacy, not being spoken for. It includes home visitors being at the table when decisions about policy and research for home visiting are being made, as well as regular program level recognition. So, small, consistent rituals that say the work matters and that home visitors matter. So, these four promotive factors that we've highlighted today: resources and supports, relationships and connections, workforce voice, and validation and recognition are the factors with perhaps more strategies to implement in the home visiting context, as well as supporting evidence. And they really represent realistic starting points for most programs, whether that be locally, state, at the tribal level, or territory level. However, as I mentioned earlier, and you'll see in the chat, there are four other equally important promotive factors that we don't have time to discuss today. Those include workforce pathways, compensation, career advancement, and autonomy and flexibility, which also have sound evidence of moving the outcomes that are important for the home visiting workforce. So I'm going to turn it back to Colleen now, who is going to do a little bit of a poll so we can hear from all of you about how these promotive factors show up in your experiences and your work.
Thanks, Marielle. So I just launched a poll, and we'd love to hear from you. Which of these factors are going well at your program, and which are maybe a little bit more difficult to implement or to sustain? Keep the poll open for about 30 more seconds. End the poll now, and I'll share the results. So it looks like when home visitors are thriving, relationships and connections are one of the promotive factors that are really driving that success. Based on our engagement with the field, that is not surprising to me at all. We've heard over and over how much home visitors value their relationships with their coworkers as well as with families. On the other hand, it looks like programs may be struggling more to provide resources and support or to give home visitors an opportunity to share their voice in programmatic decisions. Our hope is that the resources that we shared today will help you and your program feel like you are able to tap into each of these promotive factors. So thanks so much for voting, everyone. I'm going to close that poll. But there are many ways for you to use the promotive factors framework and the strategy compendium. And I'm going to share just a few ideas that we have. Okay. There are many ways that you can use the promotive factors framework and the strategy compendium. And I'm going to share just a few. First, home visiting program leads can use the promotive factors framework in strategic planning. For example, you could develop a program readiness assessment that operationalizes the 8 promotive factors into a self assessment tool to see where your program is thriving and where you could use improvement. Next, home visiting program leads can use these resources for resource allocation. Using the evidence based framework and strategies can help you to build a compelling business case and help ground budget requests in proven practices to support your workforce. Finally, you could use the compendium in program evaluation, identifying workforce support strategies to pilot and test in your program.
Thanks, Colleen. Yep. Thanks, Colleen. So Colleen's gone over lots of really great ways that you can use the framework on your own, and we certainly developed the framework as an organizational frame to encourage use and action. While it stands alone as its own as a resource, we also know from experience that programs and state systems often benefit from a thinking partner to help move from framework to action. And that is exactly what our team does. There's lots of ways that JBA can partner with programs and state systems to move this work forward. Some of these examples are provided on this slide. First, we could engage the workforce. So, national trends definitely tell you something, but they can't tell your local or state story. We can help programs go beyond national trends to understand their local story. This might be through surveys, focus groups, listening sessions, and co design processes that put home visitors and supervisors at the center. Second, we could evaluate promotive factors. So once you know your local story, you can start asking harder questions, such as which factors are strong in your program, which are thin, and what would it take to strengthen them, and how would you know it worked? We can design and lead evaluations that help answer these questions in a rigorous yet practical way. Third, we can help translate data to action. Data only earns its keep when it changes a decision, and we can help programs and systems develop context responsive strategies, not one size fits all solutions that inform sustainable infrastructure and advance outcomes for children and families. Our team brings decades of combined experience in home visiting research, evaluation, technical assistance, and workforce strategies. We've partnered with federal, state, tribal, and local programs. So while we certainly know this field, we also understand that our partners know it better in their own contexts. So if any of this resonates with you, if you've been wondering where to start or how to take the next step, we'd love to start a conversation. Here you can see lots of different ways to contact us to schedule a free consultation or an initial conversation to just tell us what you're working on or where you feel stuck. We'd love to hear more and partner with you. And whether or not we end up working together, we certainly hope and sincerely hope that the framework and strategies, as well as the resources that we've shared with you today, are useful in helping you lift up and support your home visiting workforce. So before we close, we just want to stop with a little bit of an acknowledgement. As we've mentioned throughout today's webinar, the framework, the strategies, and resources that we've shared today are really a representation of what we've learned across multiple projects focused specifically on home visiting and the home visiting workforce. So we want to acknowledge our funders and partners, as well as the home visiting models and programs that have contributed to that work over time. But most of all, we really want to thank all of the members of the home visiting workforce, home visitors, supervisors, and program leaders who carry this field every day and have engaged with us in multiple ways to help produce the insights that we've shared today.